Hello, tarot people. It's MA again. I'm coming back with another tarot activity. You might have seen I put a video up yesterday and took it down because I tried to cram too many things into one video. So we're just going to focus on tarot activity number 9 today, which I'm calling making capsule collections. One of the things I'm dealing with, and this might not be what everyone's brain needs, but I discovered having the big wall of decks staring at me doesn't work for me. And what I'm dealing with a little bit is deck overwhelm, and then that turns into underutilizing what I have. So I understand that's a position of privilege. Not everyone is in that place. My problem is deck overwhelm, which happens for me. At everyone's number where that might happen is different. So I'm not saying my collection is huge, but I don't find that I utilize it properly. And me at this stage in my life, when I was a younger person, I would have definitely had the opposite, where I was craving things and not being able to have them. And of course, that's one of the factors that gets me into this position now of having more than I can use. So here we are. So I just want to mention, for one thing, again, we're not, I guess I've shifted here. This is tarot activities that anyone can do. I started tagging these at the beginning with low buy, no buy. I've kind of shifted away from that. I was just watching Liz over at West Star Healing talk about shifting to purposeful purchasing. And yeah, I think that's definitely where I am. I will even say I am in the process of purchasing one deck that has been on my wish list for like 4 years, and I never picked it up. And while it was obtainable on the secondary market, I had a price limit, and I just found one at a very low price, and it's on my way to me. And not to be vague, but I'll show it to you eventually. So we've got that going on. My pitfall last year was not just the decks in terms of my impulse shopping as I was going through various personal things. I did way worse with stationery, pens, inks, notebooks. So the fact that I've gotten that down to 0 for the month of January, I feel really good about that. So yeah, and again, and I'm doing the same exercises there of using things. So yeah, let's talk about the capsule collections. When I did the video about thoughts on having a deck collection, and one of the things I thought I could improve about my collection, I mentioned that I have decks that I consider that I have for a certain reason, but then they're just shoved in with everything else, and I end up not really using them for that reason. So I decided the day had come where I was going to separate the decks out into little mini collections and see how that works. So yeah, I'll just show you the ones that I created, and then maybe talk through some other ideas. You might have your own ideas, which I think would be really cool. So one of the first categories I did, this was a small one, is what are the decks that I just keep on my nightstand, and why. So yeah, that's just 2 decks. That's my universal weight that I might use if I want to pull a card or do a little spread in the evening. And also, this has become the home of the Mindscapes Tarot because of the journaling questions, and if I want to just reflect on my daily card with a different visual than when I do it in the morning, I pull this card out and sometimes do a couple of journaling questions. So there's 2 that are no longer on my screaming wall of decks. They just live quietly next to the bed now. Another category, and again, part of it is like how I've justified some of my decks that I don't use so much, but then they got buried in the corner. So another category that I say, oh, I have this one because I use it for altar work and spells and meditation and magical purposes, but then they're jumbled in somewhere together. So that led me to pull out another 6 decks into a separate stack that's now in a separate location. And the ones in that pile are the two Tarot May decks, the Ritual Tarot and Cave of Sybil, the Colognes Tarot as color, and then these three other mass markets. One is this Buddha Wisdom Shakti Power, which I never use in a reading at all, but I pull out certain cards now and then as ultra cards, especially the one, there's a green Tara in here that's really lovely. And Laura Santi, who made this, studied this style of painting with, you know, with the persons to whom it is their culture. And so I really like that one. Then this is a deck that's on the what am I keeping it pile that I accidentally bought, the Great Goddess Oracle. So I will see if this has a purpose for me, and if not, I'll let it go. But it's certainly not going to have a purpose if it's in a pile where I never pull it out. So it's in the altar work and magic pile. And then the other one is my Dark Goddess Tarot, which it turns out I use for very specific purposes, don't really use for traditional readings. So these 6 decks now, 2 next to the nightstand, and then 6 in like a kind of a little section near my altar stuff. Then the next capsule is the little decks, or the decks I don't have to worry about, that I might throw in my bag as I'm going out either to work, coffee shop, anywhere that I'm going. I always like to have a deck with me. I might not be alone in that. And that one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's 8 more decks here that I've put in this pile. They're in a basket. I'm sure many people are familiar with keeping a monthly card basket. So this is on a little table behind my front door, or kind of as you would be leaving the house. So here's what's in it. The Wild Unknown Pocket Archetypes, and this is the one in the tin. This does part-time work on my nightstand too. That's one I might use there. Tarot Vintage. This little gem that sadly I can't use at work because the wands are probes. The Centennial in a tin, the Ashura Tarot, this Fournier deck, and then 2 that are in pouches. I'm not going to bother to unzip. This is Salsa Burrito Tiny Traveler and Next World Mini. Yeah, these are bags. They're not tarot bags, but for the tiny decks, a lot of times I'll find little zip pouches at thrift shops that fit decks really nicely. Yeah, so that's another 8 decks. So far I've pulled 16 decks off the screaming wall of decks. And the last one, and probably the biggest pile is the decks where I say, oh, I have this one because I use it for my creative practice and my writing. But then there again, I'm not doing it because they're piled in the shelf. And that's in this big chonker box. There's not that many, but I think a lot of them are in the boxes, so it's big. Okay, what's in here? In here is the full-size Wild Unknown Archetypes. That's the only deck I have 2 of. Kantaji Oracle. Art Oracles, which, you know, this was one of my impulse buys last year. I don't love it, so I'm going to see if it works in this space. It does have creative prompts on the cards. They're kind of cute, but I don't know. They didn't really work in regular readings for me, so we're going to try it there. The William Blake Tarot. And thank you. Someone had pointed out that Ed Burin has the expanded guidebook as a PDF on his website that you can download for free, because the version in this 3rd edition is a much smaller book. The Folklore Oracle, which for now I'm keeping in this box because of the questions that are on the cards in case I want to write. This is a deck I never had with my divination stuff, but it's a writing prompt deck by Natalie Goldberg from Shambhala Press. I have this odd little Patrick Valenza deck that I basically never use, Garden of Lucid Daydreams. And I'm just going to see if I can find a use for it, because I do like the art, but I just never use it for anything. And in here is the Literary Witches Oracle that I altered to trim down the object cards to tiny ones. And then the last one in this box, another mass market deck, is the Radiant Tarot, which is in here because the guidebook is so fabulous and is filled with creative prompts and exercises, and it's just really good. And so I took this whole box, which is another 8 decks, I think. And now it's in my like creative studio writing and art space where they belong, so that I will use them there. And what this did, first of all, I think it put 24 decks in their place where they will either get used, or I can note that they're not getting used for that reason. And if they're not if they're not working out for that reason, then they're probably going to go in a pause pile. But it also took 24 decks off my little shelves. And now my shelves have room to breathe. They're not cramped in there. I store all my decks horizontally, so they have been Jenga'd in the way that will make them fit. So removing 24 there really helped. And some other things I thought of as I now have the space and looking at the decks. There's another category I'm going to group together on the shelf called the Biggins. And those are the decks with the cards that are so big that I don't really use them for multi-card readings. And I mostly use them each month. I pick a deck to do a daily draw from, and that's a card that I display in my space. And yeah, I notice that I keep using the same decks there because they're large, and that's really the only thing I use them for. So I think those could go together. And some other ideas of groupings are grouping them by system, like a little area that's Thoth, Marseille, Pips, Smith-Waite, Weirdos, or decks. Maybe I have a capsule of decks that I have because I use them to study another subject, like the Herb Crafters is like that. Or maybe if anyone's has decks with astrology where you keep saying, I'm going to use this to study astrology, so maybe capsuling those together. Decks that the plan is to do deeper study on the deck itself is another thing we might have groups of. Decks I don't use as much, I think I may section those together so I can explore using them and finding out why I'm not using them, whether it's part of the overwhelm or if we might not end up getting out. And decks I haven't figured out yet. Yeah, that's kind of the same thing. Am I going to keep this? Are we getting along? Does this deck have a purpose? Has this deck found a purpose yet? And is it going to find one? So yeah, so that's our little activity. Yeah, I'd love to hear how you might find some little capsule collections. This, as many of the things I'm putting out there, look, this is not groundbreaking stuff. This is stuff I'm sure has been said 100 times. I'm just trying to compile them and keep us having whatever, something to do, something to talk about. The world is a very upsetting place lately, so I hope that you are as safe as you can be, and that tarot and everything and anything else in your life is a friend to you and a force for good in some way. And so until next time, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye.